Our next performance is entitled Up Dev.
It was around 10 p.m. I should have been in bed, but I could hear Up Dev shouting outside in the street. The window of my room was upstairs and facing it. The window of my room was upstairs and facing the street. I could get up and look out at all the comings and goings. We were living on the main street, which stretched from one end of the town to the other. The town and the street were cut in half by the river. It had an additional use. It was our border, and the children who lived on the other side of the river were the enemy, whom we had lots of wars with. We kids had a run of the town with a freedom you can only dream of. I was between 5 and 6 years old then. My parents owned a pub, which my mother and my sister ran, and my room was above the bar. My mother refused to serve Up Dev a long time ago. She told him to go home and give the money to his wife and children. They had about 12 children. Up Dev was across the road. I stood at the window in the dark of my room quietly watching it. The street was well lit. He was staggering along the pavement shouting, "Up Dev!" every few swaying steps. There was a light rain and the window was wet, distorting him. It was like looking through tear-filled eyes. The figure was a short man like Quasimodo, balancing on a belfry. He wore a long, dirty gabardine coat. And his arms swung around as he staggered, stopping only to shout, "Up Dev!" every few steps. In Ireland at that time, during the election campaigns, they used the words "Up Dev" as a slogan of support for Eamon de Valera, who participated in the Irish Revolution and the Civil War. He was Prime Minister for many years, and then President, almost up to his death in his 90s. I don't think Up Dev intended this constant refrain as a term of endearment to the Prime Minister, more like 2 fingers in his direction. He passed on up the street, and I could hear him for some time repeating what had now become his name. Some weeks later, my friend Joe and I were walking down the street towards the river. On the way, we passed Cuckoo Magnon's pub, and sure enough, the little door behind the window opened and the cuckoo stuck his nose out. He had a long, pointy nose, which seemed to take ages to fully emerge before we saw his face. He liked to see everyone that passed. Naturally, we had to say, "Cuckoo, cuckoo," as we ran by his pub. Before we got to the bridge that crosses the river into enemy territory was the Fair Green. And just before that, the Widow Flynn's shop and pub. Lots of farmers who attended the fairs went to her place for a pint, and many a deal was struck in that shop and pub. The Widow Flynn always wore black and worked harder than any man. She was a tough old bird, my father often said. She had chickens. They rambled all over the Fair Green, pecking and scratching as they went. And every so often, she'd give us a job and pay us with sweets, which of course we... Sorry, I'll read that again. Every so often, she'd give us a job and pay us with sweets. We, of course, thought we earned them. On this particular day, she asked us to bring the chickens back into her yards. We threw our legs over our sticks and trotted off to round up the chickens. Roy Rogers and the Lone Ranger, we had all the right noises for ourselves and for our horses. The chickens were compliant and knew where to go. Necks stretched in front of them, running back to the yard, wings flapping in the odd squawk of annoyance. However, there was one. There's always one. She had white and brown feathers. They made her look like she was speckled. She refused to go back to the yards and gave us a lot of trouble. Eventually we got her back, and we received our due payment. Joe and I headed off with our mouths full of sweets, discussing the road chicken. We went back to the Fair Green, happy as sandboys. Behind us, a dark figure appeared, taking us by our arms. It was one of Up Dev's sons. He was about 14 and a bully. We always kept clear of him, and all of Up Dev's children for that matter. He pushed us into the little corrugated iron shed in the middle of the Fair Green. It didn't have any windows, just a doorway with a half-wooden door.